In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 offseason plan series, and today we're looking at the Vancouver Canucks, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned, today we're covering the Vancouver Canucks in our 2019 offseason plan series. If you're new to this series, we basically break this down into 3 segments. Segment 1 is an 18-19 season recap, where we look at some key team and individual statistics. We also look at any changes that the team went throughout the season. Segment 2, we take a look at the overall salary cap situation, any pending UFAs, RFAs, and contracts they need to manage during the offseason. And thirdly, we're going to take a look at where the team was at, where it needs to go, and what steps does this team need to make in order to improve to get ready and get more competitive for next year. If you've missed the previous videos in this series, I will link the playlist up here in the YouTube cards, and you can check out the remainder of teams covered. If the team you're looking for hasn't been covered yet, it will be soon. We will be getting all teams covered here over the coming days and weeks to complete this series. Now let's jump in here with an 18-19 season recap. Now the Vancouver Canucks certainly made some progress this year. They finished with a record of 35, 36, and 11 for 81 points. 5th place in the Pacific Division, out of the playoffs here again, but still, like I said, overall they had a lot of good progress, and their young players certainly are looking pretty dynamic. Taking a look at some key team statistics, they had a 17.1% power play for 22nd best. Obviously, that could stand to improve, and I think as their younger players mature, hopefully add a power play quarterback like Quinn, Hughes, for example, for a full season. I do expect that to improve. Their PK was pretty solid, though, 81.1% for 11th best in the league, so that certainly was going well for them. They do have a lot of veterans in that bottom 6 who can help out in that regard. Goals for were 225 goals for 25th best, so not great. So the team certainly needs to score more goals in order to keep improving. Goals against were 254 for 20th best, so working their way up towards the upper half of the league here, so they have a ways to go, but at least things are trending here in the right direction. Now let's take a look at some key individual performances like their goaltending and some of their top scorers. The number 1 goaltender for the Canucks this past year was Jacob Markstrom, who finished with a record of 28, 23, and 9, a .912 save percentage, and a 2.77 goals against average. So overall, not too bad. Really considering the team that's in front of them is really young and obviously not a playoff team, so they're giving up more goals than they'd like right now. But overall, I must say Markstrom did have a pretty decent year. He's 1 year away from being a free agent, so we'll be interested to see if they decide to sign him to a longer-term deal. Obviously, they do have prospect goaltender Thatcher Demko in the system, likely going to be the backup this year coming. And of course, they do have younger prospect goaltender Michael DiPietro on his way up through the junior ranks too. So they do have a lot of goaltending depth in the organization. Just a matter of they decide how long they're going to run with Markstrom here. But for right now, I do think he's a pretty decent choice for the Canucks. Taking a look at some of their top scorers, they were led by rookie sensation Elias Pettersson with 66 points. He would have had more if he wouldn't have been injured a lot this year, but he had a few times where he was out for a significant period of time. So Pettersson certainly had a terrific rookie year for sure. If he could have stayed healthy, he would have been even more phenomenal of a rookie. Next up was Bo Horvat, 61 points. Brock Buster was next at 56 points. And bringing up the points from the back end was veteran defenseman Alex Edler with 34 points. Now let's take a look at some of the changes and trades we saw to this team throughout the year. Now this team made a number of trades for the most part, nothing too significant, a lot of minor deals, but they all had their impacts in one way or another. They did finally move out veteran forward Sam Gagner, who ended up going to the Edmonton Oilers. At one point, the Canucks had him demoted, playing in the American Hockey League, and they had an agreement for he played for the Toronto Marlies for a period of time. They did end up trading goaltender Anders Nilsson to Ottawa. Obviously, he's a pending UFA now. Of course, Nilsson and Markstrom were a tandem for a while, but Nilsson's time in Vancouver was up. We saw them make a trade here with the Pittsburgh Penguins, sending the defenseman Eric Branson over to the Pens for forward Tanner Pearson. We saw them acquire Josh Leivo from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we also saw them acquire the well-traveled Ryan Spooner as well. Now, of course, Leivo and Pearson didn't do too badly. Spooner, on the other hand, didn't get a whole lot of opportunity here, but either way, those are all the trades and moves that the Canucks made throughout the NHL season. Now let's take a look at their salary cap situation and any pending RFAs or UFAs that they need to look after this year. Now, taking a look first at the UFA list, it's pretty short and sweet. There's not a lot to do here. Most of their work is going to be on the RFA side, but they do need to decide on some defensemen, including Alex Edler and Luke Schenn. Now, both are possibilities to return. I think it's definitely a definite possibility to both get signed. I know Luke Schenn was actually rather impressive after he was acquired. He's actually another player that they acquired throughout the season from the Anaheim Ducks. There has been some talk that they're already in discussions around, I believe it's probably only going to be probably no more than 2-year extension. But he did seem to fit in there nicely. Alex Edler likely does return. I think it's quite possible. They do need some veterans on that back end. But it's going to boil down to contract negotiations. If the money and term is right, they'll bring him back. If not, they will move on. But we'll see what happens. But I do think it's a definite possibility. Taking a look at their RFAs, is we're going to be a lot of work to be done here, led by Brock Boeser. Now, Brock Boeser certainly has earned himself a longer-term contract, but will he get the 8-year deal, or will he get a bridge contract? It's certainly debatable. If you take a look at his point totals, they are decent, but if you take a look around the NHL, there's been so many big-name RFAs around the league and big performances from some young players. As much as his have been impressive, he's not going to be able to command some of the bigger money that some of the other top guys have. So he might want to take an opportunity here to bet on himself, take a shorter-term deal, maybe a 3 or 4 year contract, and then maybe do the longer term deal at that point. Hard to say, but either way, he is priority number one amongst the contracts to get looked after here. They've also got RFAs Marcus Granlund, Josh Levo, Tyler Mott, Nikolai Goldobin, and defensemen Derek Pouliot and Ben Hutton. Derek Pouliot has already been told he is not going to be retained. He will not be qualified, therefore becoming a UFA and can sign anywhere that he's able to. Ben Hutton, on the other hand, I believe is only 1 year away from free agency, so they're not going to want to do a 1-year deal here with him or end up going through salary arbitration. So certainly debatable what happens with Ben Hutton this summer, but I do think it's a pretty decent chance he is signed and retained. Now, taking a look at their overall salary cap situation for next year, the Canucks do have a lot of space to work with. Taking a look at their salary cap situation here, the Canucks have 20 NHL contracts in place for next year for a total of $52.5 million. That gives them about $30.5 million in salary cap space. As you just seen here, there's lots of names that need to be signed or replaced here on their roster. So depending on how much money they have left over, once that's all complete, will determine what else they can do here through free agency or any other acquisitions. But the Canucks are certainly in a pretty good spot that way, but they do need to keep in mind they have some other younger players that are going to need some fairly big-time extensions here in the next year or two. So they're going to want to leave some space open for that as well. Now let's take a look at what this Canucks team needs to do in order to keep pushing for the playoffs and move forward here with their rebuild. Step one is to continue letting their prospects develop. This Canucks team has a lot of terrific young prospects. They should have a full season of Quinn Hughes next year, which is going to be a big help. As I mentioned in the opening segment about the power play, they need a power play quarterback, and he likely is that player. So that's going to add another dynamic to this team, which will really help them take advantage of more power play opportunities, with more goals, more wins. It's just a major plus for this team. So that's a big step in the right direction, adding him. They've also got some pretty other interesting defensemen on the prospect list here as well, including Elias, who's been a little slower developing, a lot of that due to injuries. And of course, they got Jet Wu, who had a terrific junior season in the WHL as well. Like I said, as I also mentioned, they got goalie Michael DiPietro to come up here and hopefully challenge Thatcher Demko and Jacob Markstrom over the next year or two as well for a spot and see what kind of goaltender he can become at the NHL level. So the future is bright in Vancouver. All kinds of great prospects who might be able to fill in some of these spots instead of going down and signing some potential UFAs like they did last year. I know a lot of the UFAs were bottom six guys. They spent a lot of money on the fourth line, and some of that worked out and some of that didn't. So I'd like to see them do something a little bit different this year and maybe not go down that road again. Let their younger players take more of a bigger role into next year. Obviously, like I mentioned during the RFA segment here as well, the big priority is getting Brock Boeser signed either to a fairly substantial bridge contract or a longer-term deal. But I think a bridge contract would be fair for Brock here. He's had some pretty good years, but I do think he's able to reach another level here yet, and it might be worth betting on himself on a shorter-term contract to be able to cash in more later. Next up, I think they really need to name a captain, and they have that player, and his name is Bo Horvat. There's no doubt he's a leader of this team on the ice. He's a terrific two-way player, a little bit underrated, underappreciated to a degree. If he played on the East Coast, he'd probably get more attention. But Horvat's a terrific player and needs to be named captain this summer. I think it's important for teams to have captains. I know there's still a number of teams around the league that have kind of gone by leadership by committee, which I'm not always a fan of. I think sometimes it's nice to have a direct leader and a voice to kind of guide these younger players. And Horvat is definitely that guy in my opinion. Another big thing the Canucks need to try to do this year if possible, which is not going to be easy, but they need to shed themselves of Louis Eriksson if possible. We all seen that interview he did with an overseas report, I believe it was in Sweden, saying how the coach didn't trust him 100% and he's kind of frustrated. His ice time has been down and whatnot. And you know what? He hasn't earned the ice time. His play has been terrible. Many nights he's invisible out there and he's not earning his contract. If the Canucks need to do a retention or a buyout, like they need to find a way to get rid of this guy off their team, especially if he's going to be negative like this. It's not good to be around the younger players and have that kind of attitude. So we'll see. I know it's not going to be easy, and there's a pretty good possibility he still comes back because getting rid of him is not going to be an easy move. But if they can find a way to shed themselves of Louis Eriksson, that would really go a long way to freeing up cap space, freeing up a roster spot, and just moving forward here without him. Some other potential players who could be traded or bought out include Tim Schaller and Ryan Spooner. They don't have a lot of time left on their contracts. They're not big money contracts, so buyouts are a possibility. If they can't find a trade, they could always retain a salary, like I said, with Eriksson as well. At least it's not such a big deal if they had to, but if they can free up some roster spots that way by moving out those guys, that would also help out as well. Obviously, when Trevor Linden left the organization, it was highly debated that more than likely here ownership was pressuring him to kind of accelerate the rebuild and maybe not always go with such a young group and bring in some more veterans to kind of move things along and back into playoffs. Obviously, as an ownership group, they're concerned about money. Obviously, ticket sales, playoff games really help generate that a long way here. And their differences between philosophy here is kind of what led him to end up resigning and leaving. So it's debatable whether or not Jim Benning will take the same approach. Of course, we've heard many NHL trade rumors about some pretty significant names this year, and the Canucks have been linked to some of them, including a big one with the Dallas Stars and Jamie Benn. And of course, Jamie Benn is from the area, born in BC. Speculated that he might want out of Dallas after the comments from Jim Lance earlier in the year and the big controversy that way. And you could tell down the stretch he didn't seem to have his heart in it as much, and you can't help but wonder if maybe he wants a fresh start out of Dallas. So I've automatically speculated where he has a full no move that the Canucks would be a team that he'd be willing to waive to go back home to, and that Bo Horvat would be the guy going the other way. Well, personally, I would not make that trade, as much as I would be somewhat okay with the Canucks maybe acquiring a guy like him. For considering what he makes for money, would not give up a key young piece like Bo Horvat to do it. They'd have to go a whole different route, and I just don't see that happening. Personally, Jamie Benn is at a stage of his career where he's making $9.5 million. He's got a lot of years left on his contract, and he's starting to decline. So I just don't see that as being a good move, unless they could get him for a fairly cheap price, which is unlikely going to happen out of Dallas. So I know there's been lots of rumors that way, and I kind of hope in a way that Canucks kind of steer away from that and continue to build around these young core players. Now, they also have another fairly high pick at the NHL Draft this year, so they're going to get themselves a pretty solid prospect again to add to this group. They very well might be able to grab another defenseman. If that were them, that's kind of the road I would go down. Victor Soderstrom's a player they could be taking a look at, maybe a Philip Broberg, Cam York. There's all kinds of defensemen that are likely going to be available there that they could certainly have a look at to kind of add to that decor that's going to need some more young pieces moving forward. So if you're GM Jim Benning this summer, what are the moves you think are most important that the Canucks need to make to move this team forward and get ready and more competitive for next year? If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more videos in this series, as well as plenty of other content. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like as well before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. Thank you for watching. I will catch you next time.